My town's siren goes off every few weeks. Millridge had always been proud of its predictability. Nestled in a valley between the Appalachian foothills, it was the kind of place where seasons changed the scenery, but never the routine. Main Street hosted the same 5 stores it had for decades. The high school football team practiced on the same field their fathers and grandfathers had used. The church bell rang at precisely 9 o'clock every Sunday morning. People left their doors unlocked and knew their neighbor's business almost as well as their own. October's Harvest Festival had concluded, as it always did, with Mayor Wilson's speech about community and tradition, followed by apple cider in paper cups and children racing home with sticky fingers. Nothing ever changed in Millridge. That was its charm, that was its promise, until the siren. It came at 2:17 a.m. on a Tuesday, 3 days after the festival, a wailing that started low and climbed to a pitch that seemed to vibrate the fillings in people's teeth. Lights flicked on in houses up and down Cedar Street, then Maple Avenue, then throughout the whole town. Residents stumbled onto porches in bathrobes and slippers, phones in hand, searching for emergency alerts that weren't there. Sheriff Alan Donovan's phone rang 17 times before he could get to the station. By then the lines were jammed with panicked calls. Could be a tornado warning, Deputy Lewis suggested, though the night sky was clear and star-filled. In October, Donovan pulled at his mustache, a habit from 20 years of law enforcement. Get someone to check the civil defense system. Old Cold War relics probably shorted out. The siren continued its rise and fall, a perfect pattern that repeated without variation. People gathered in small clusters on the streets, some covering their ears, others filming with their phones. Dogs howled in backyards. Babies wailed in synchrony with the mechanical scream. At exactly 7 minutes and 43 seconds after it began, the siren stopped. The silence that followed seemed almost as jarring as the noise had been. Chloe Patterson had timed it, standing on the small balcony of her apartment above Greta's bakery, stopwatch function running on her phone. She'd felt an odd compulsion to document the exact duration. As the town's head librarian, precision was second nature to her. Information wanted to be cataloged, measured, understood. She watched her neighbors slowly return to their homes, shaking their heads and muttering about malfunctions and interrupted sleep. Something about their movements seemed off, slightly too mechanical, as if they were sleepwalking with their eyes open. The next morning, Sheriff Donovan's explanation ran as a banner headline in the Millridge Gazette: Civil Defense Siren Malfunction, System to be repaired. It's strange though, isn't it? Chloe said to Betty, her assistant at the library, as they reshelved books in the local history section. I didn't even know we had a civil defense siren still operational. Betty, 67, and a lifelong resident, frowned. They installed it during the Cuban Missile Crisis, up on the water tower, but I thought they took it down years ago when they repainted. Chloe paused, a book on Appalachian mining history halfway to its shelf. Betty shrugged. Electronics these days, always going haywire. But something in the older woman's eyes, a flicker of uncertainty, made Chloe curious. She spent her lunch break searching the library's digital archives for information about Millridge's civil defense systems. There was surprisingly little documentation. That evening, walking home past the town square, she noticed something unusual. The regulars at Benson's diner, men who'd gathered for coffee at the same time every day for years, were arguing loudly enough to be heard through the windows. Outside the pharmacy, Mrs. Winters snapped at her 7-year-old grandson with uncharacteristic sharpness. The boy's eyes were red-rimmed, suggesting he hadn't slept well. Neither had Chloe. Her dreams had been troubled by a sound just below the threshold of hearing, not quite the siren, but something similar, something calling. 3 weeks passed. The town council allocated funds to decommission the civil defense system. Life in Millridge settled back into its comfortable rhythm. Chloe almost convinced herself that the incident had been nothing more than an electrical anomaly. Then it happened again. Same time, 2:17 a.m. Same sound, that oscillating wail that seemed to penetrate bone and tooth. Same duration, 7 minutes and 43 seconds, which Chloe confirmed with her stopwatch. This time, Sheriff Donovan blamed a power surge from the aging electrical grid, triggered a ghost signal in the system. He explained at an impromptu town meeting the next day, "We've got contractors coming to remove the whole thing next week." Chloe noticed the dark circles under his eyes, the slight tremor in his hands, as he pointed to diagrams of the town's infrastructure. He was lying, or at least not telling the whole truth. After the meeting, she approached him. "Sheriff, where exactly is this siren located?" His smile didn't reach his eyes. "Just an old box of wires on the water tower, Miss Patterson. Nothing to see. Don't worry, we'll have it gone soon enough." 6 weeks later, the contractors had come and gone. The town newsletter ran a small piece confirming the obsolete system had been completely removed and disposed of. Chloe clipped the article and pinned it to the corkboard above her desk at home. That night, she couldn't sleep. She stood at her window, looking out at the quiet town, waiting. Something inside her knew it wasn't over. At 2:17 a.m., the siren began again. 7 minutes and 43 seconds of that piercing wail. And though no one in Millridge would admit it the next day, everyone had gotten out of bed before it started, as if summoned. Everyone had stood at their windows or doors, waiting. Everyone had felt something shift in the foundations of their quiet, predictable town. Something ancient stirring beneath the surface of their ordinary lives. Chloe added a note beneath the clipped article. "Third occurrence. System supposedly removed. What are they hiding?" It was the first entry in what would become her obsession. By the 4th month, Chloe Patterson's small apartment had transformed. The corkboard above her desk now sprawled across an entire wall of her living room. A constellation of notes, newspaper clippings, and photographs connected by red string. At its center, a calendar marking each occurrence of the siren, with precise dates and times. She studied the wall while nursing a cup of tea gone cold. The pattern refused to reveal itself. The intervals between sirens varied 23 days, then 42, then 19. The only constants were the time, always 2:17 a.m., and the duration, 7 minutes and 43 seconds, never a second more or less. Her phone buzzed with a text from Jack Rivera. "You coming to Benson's? I've got something." Jack was her only confidant in this growing obsession. As the technical director at WMIL, Millridge's small radio station, he had access to equipment that could potentially analyze the siren's sound profile. More importantly, he didn't dismiss her concerns with patronizing smiles like Sheriff Donovan, or worried glances like her colleagues at the library. Benson's Diner sat at the corner of Main and Elm, its neon sign flickering in the January chill. Inside, the warmth carried the scent of coffee and grilled onions. Jack was already in their usual booth, hunched over his laptop. He had the look of someone who hadn't slept properly in days, a condition becoming increasingly common in Millridge. "You look terrible," she said, sliding in across from him. "Thanks." He pushed a manila folder toward her. "Hospital admissions. My cousin works in records at County General." Chloe leafed through the photocopied documents. "These are confidential, Jack. Names are redacted. Look at the numbers." The statistics were clear. Since October, hospital admissions from Millridge had increased by 37%. Sleep disorders, anxiety, and unexplained neurological symptoms dominated the list. Dr. Westbrook prescribed more sleeping pills last month than in the previous 6 combined, Jack said, voice low. "People aren't just hearing the siren, they're changing because of it." Chloe had noticed the shift herself. The librarian in her cataloged the symptoms: short tempers where there had been patience, vacant stares interrupting conversations, children drawing the same spiral pattern in crayon, over and over. "Have you noticed the animals?" she asked. Jack nodded. "The strays behind the supermarket. Gone. Not just them. The Wilsons' dog disappeared last week. The Petersons' cat. Even the birds seem scarcer. I've been monitoring police frequencies." Jack opened his laptop, showing a spreadsheet. "Minor crime is up 22%. Domestic disturbances, vandalism, drunk, and disorderly. Nothing major yet, but the trend line is climbing." The waitress arrived with coffee, slamming the cups down with uncharacteristic force. Coffee sloshed over the rims. She didn't apologize, just walked away muttering. "Case in point," Jack whispered. "Maggie's worked here 15 years. Never seen her like this." Chloe took a sip of the scalding coffee. "I need your help with something else. Can you analyze recordings of the siren?" "Already tried. The station's equipment isn't picking it up properly." He ran a hand through his disheveled hair. "It's like the frequency is just outside what our mics can capture cleanly, but I'm working on it." That night, another siren came. 7 minutes and 43 seconds of wailing that vibrated windows and set dogs howling. Chloe stood on her balcony, timing it, feeling it resonate in her chest cavity. The town below was awake and still, figures standing in windows, on porches, in yards, all looking up, though there was nothing to see in the night sky. When it ended, no one immediately went back inside. They stood for nearly a minute afterward, as if awaiting instructions. Chloe felt it too, an expectation, a sense that something should follow the noise, a message, a command. The next morning, she added the new occurrence to her wall and stepped back to study it. Still no pattern to the timing, but as she stared at the constellation of data, a different pattern emerged. She grabbed her phone and called Jack. "The animals," she said without preamble. "I'm in the middle of. Check the county animal control reports. See if there's a spike in missing pets after each occurrence." By noon, Jack had confirmed her suspicion. Each siren was followed by a wave of missing animal reports. Pets first, then strays, finally wildlife. Game wardens had noted decreased deer sightings in the surrounding woods. Chloe spent the afternoon in the library archives, searching for anything that might explain the phenomenon. In the local history section, a thin volume caught her eye. Industrial Development of Millridge County, 1940 to 1960. Inside was a brief mention of Meridian Resources, a company that had conducted a resource exploration operation north of town in 1956 to 57. The book contained little detail, but a reference led her to microfilm copies of the Millridge Gazette. From that period, she scrolled through months of banal small-town news until a headline jumped out: "Meridian Resources ceases operations, cites unprofitable yields." The article was frustratingly vague, but a handwritten note in the margin of the physical copy read, "They found something else." The handwriting was shaky, elderly, perhaps added years after publication. That evening, she added Meridian Resources to her wall and connected it with a question mark to the siren timeline. At home, she couldn't sleep. Every sound, the hum of her refrigerator, the tick of the baseboard heater, seemed to contain echoes of the siren. She found herself standing at her window at 2:10 a.m., waiting, though it had only been 2 days since the last occurrence. Her phone rang, startling her. "Jack, turn on your police scanner app," he said without greeting. 3 minutes later, she heard the call, a domestic disturbance on Oak Street that had escalated to aggravated assault. Warren Miller had attacked his wife with a kitchen knife, screaming about "the voices won't stop." The Millers had been married 42 years. He'd been the high school math teacher until his retirement. They'd never had so much as a noise complaint. The next morning, Chloe drove to the radio station. Jack looked even worse than before, his eyes bloodshot. "I got something," he said, leading her to his workstation. "I set up specialized equipment at my place captured the full spectrum of the last siren. On his computer screen, a waveform analysis showed patterns that made no sense to Chloe. Civil defense sirens have specific sound profiles, Jack explained. Warning patterns. This isn't that. The modulation is complex, almost like... He hesitated. Like what? Like speech, or what a spectrogram of speech would look like if the vocal apparatus was not human. He played the recording. The familiar wail emerged from the speakers, but slowed down and filtered. It revealed subtle variations, patterns within patterns that made Chloe's skin prickle. "It's trying to communicate," she whispered. "Or calling something," Jack said, "like a mating call, or a dinner bell." That night, Sheriff Donovan visited Chloe's apartment, his cruiser parked conspicuously out front. "Folks at the station tell me you've been asking questions about Meridian Resources," he said, declining her offer of coffee. And this, he gestured at her wall of evidence, "isn't healthy, Miss Patterson. 6 sirens in 4 months, Sheriff. System supposedly removed, animals disappearing, crime increasing. Something's happening to this town." He avoided her eyes. "Sometimes old wiring acts up, nothing more to it. And Meridian Resources?" A flash of something fear crossed his face. "Before my time. Mining company came and went. Nothing unusual." As he left, he paused at the door. "For your own good, Miss Patterson. Let it go." But that night, as she added his visit to her wall, connecting it to both the sirens and Meridian, Chloe knew she couldn't stop. Something was awakening in Millridge, and the sirens were only the beginning. The Sunny Pines retirement community sat on the outskirts of Lakeville, 3 towns over from Millridge. Its cheerful yellow buildings and manicured gardens belied the institutional nature of the place. Chloe signed the visitor log, noting that Harold Wright had few visitors. The last entry was over a month ago. Finding the retired journalist had taken considerable digging. His byline on the 1957 Meridian Resources article had led her through county records, obituaries, thankfully not his, and finally, a call to the Gazette's current editor, who remembered the old-timer had moved to Sunny Pines 5 years prior. Room 237 was at the end of a long corridor that smelled of disinfectant and boiled vegetables. "Come in, it's open." The voice was surprisingly strong for a man in his 90s. Harold Wright sat by the window in a worn armchair, a book open on his lap. Thin white hair crowned a face mapped with wrinkles, but his eyes were sharp behind thick glasses. The room was modest but personalized. Bookshelves lined one wall, and framed press credentials hung beside photographs of a younger Harold with various dignitaries. "Mr. Wright, I'm Chloe Patterson, the librarian from Millridge." Recognition flickered across his face. Millridge. Been a long time since I thought about that place. He gestured to a chair opposite his. "You're here about the siren." The statement caught her off guard. "How did you know?" A thin smile creased his face. "Because it's starting again. I can feel it." He tapped his temple, like a toothache, in the brain. "The article you wrote in 1957 about Meridian Resources," Chloe began, retrieving her notebook. "There was a note in the margin of our library's copy. They found something else." Harold's gaze drifted to the window, where rain had begun to speckle the glass. "My editor removed most of what I'd written, said it was unsubstantiated, dangerous even." "What did they find, Mr. Wright?" He turned back to her, eyes suddenly intense. "They weren't mining. Not really. Meridian was a front. The operation was government-funded, Department of Energy, they claimed. But the men who came and went didn't act like energy researchers." Chloe leaned forward. "What were they doing?" "Drilling. Deep drilling. The official story was natural gas exploration. But they brought in equipment I'd never seen before, seismic monitors, sound equipment." He paused, reaching for a glass of water on the side table with a slightly trembling hand. They found a cavern system, deeper than any recorded in the geological surveys, and something was down there. Something. The workers wouldn't talk much. Scared. But one night at McGinty's bar, long gone now, a foreman got drunk, told me they'd broken through to a cavity that shouldn't exist, said they'd heard sounds coming up the shaft. Harold's voice lowered. Not cave noises, not water or shifting rock, rhythmic sounds, patterns, like something was down there, listening to them work, learning. A chill ran through Chloe, despite the overheated room. What happened then? One of the workers, a man named Clayton, went home after his shift and killed his wife and children, took his own life after, left a note that made no sense. Something about voices in the walls, calling him. Harold shook his head. The next day, Meridian announced immediate cessation of operations. Within 48 hours, they'd packed up everything and cleared out. Government men supervised as they poured more concrete into that hole than made any sense for a simple closure. Chloe consulted her notes. The site is north of town? Harold nodded. About 3 miles up Old Mill Road, then east, into the woods. There used to be a dirt access road, but they probably let that grow over. His eyes narrowed. Why are you asking about this now? What's happening in Millridge? She hesitated, then told him about the sirens. The precise timing, the effects on townspeople and animals, the increasing hostility and sleep disturbances. Harold closed his eyes, his face pained. It's waking up. Whatever they found down there, or whatever found them, it's waking up. Do you think the government knows? Could they be behind the sirens? He laughed, a dry sound without humor. Child, the government put a lid on something they didn't understand, and hoped it would stay buried. They're not making those sirens. That's coming from below. As Chloe drove back to Millridge, rain pounding on the windshield, Harold's parting words echoed in her mind. Don't go to the site alone, and whatever you do, don't listen too closely to the siren. It gets in your head, changes how you think. The radio station was quiet when she arrived. Sunday afternoon meant only a skeleton crew, with Jack alone in the sound booth, running pre-recorded programming. He looked up as she entered, dark circles prominent under his eyes. You found him? Chloe nodded, shrugging off her rain-soaked jacket. It's worse than we thought. She relayed Harold's story while Jack listened intently, occasionally jotting notes. When she finished, he pushed back from his console, running both hands through his hair. Jesus, so what? There's some kind of creature living under Millridge, and now it's, what, calling to us? Or through us, Chloe said quietly. Harold thinks whatever's down there is using the siren to communicate, maybe to influence people somehow. Jack turned to his computer, pulling up files. I've been working on the siren recording, analyzing it 6 ways from Sunday. He clicked on a waveform display. Look at this pattern here. It repeats throughout the entire duration. The display showed rhythmic spikes and valleys, too regular to be random. And here's a human voice saying hello for comparison. A second waveform appeared. Different, obviously, but the fundamental structure is similar. Deliberate modulation of sound to convey information. It's talking to us, Chloe whispered. Or trying to. And here's the really strange part. Jack clicked again, bringing up a third display. This is brainwave activity during REM sleep. See the similarity? The pattern did bear a striking resemblance to the siren's waveform. It's broadcasting on a frequency our brains recognize, maybe even respond to. Jack's voice was tight. That's why people are acting strange. It's getting into their heads while they sleep. That night, Chloe couldn't stop thinking about the hole in the ground north of town. What had they found? What had they disturbed? She added everything Harold had told her to her wall, connecting threads between the 1957 incident and the current sirens. The next occurrence came just before dawn. 7 minutes and 43 seconds of that penetrating wail. This time, Chloe didn't just time it. She recorded it on her phone, feeling a strange compulsion to capture the sound. Afterward, she found herself standing on her balcony for nearly 20 minutes, staring north toward the woods, before shaking herself from the trance-like state. At the library that day, 3 separate patrons asked for books on cave systems and underground formations, unusual requests for a small-town library. One elderly man, Mr. Jenkins, who'd been coming in for mystery novels for as long as Chloe had worked there, instead checked out a technical geology text. When she commented on the change, he stared at her blankly for a moment before saying, "Need to understand what's beneath us." That evening, she met Jack at his apartment. He had converted his spare bedroom into a makeshift sound lab, with acoustic foam on the walls and various pieces of equipment crowding a desk. "I've been comparing recordings from each occurrence," he said, showing her spectrograms on his monitor. "They're similar but not identical. The pattern is evolving, becoming more complex. Like it's refining its message," Chloe suggested. "Or learning how to communicate more effectively." Jack played the most recent recording, slowed down and filtered. The modulations were clearer now, almost like words buried under layers of noise. "I think we need to find that site," Chloe said. "See what's actually there now." Jack looked uneasy. "Harold said not to go alone. That's why you're coming with me." They agreed to go the following day, equipped with recording devices and cameras. As Chloe left his apartment, the night felt heavier somehow, the darkness between streetlights more profound. A police cruiser rolled slowly past, the officer inside watching her with an unreadable expression. At home, she added the new Siren occurrence to her wall. Standing back, she finally saw what had been eluding her. The intervals between events were shortening. What had started as weeks apart was now down to days. The siren was coming more frequently. And somewhere deep beneath Millridge, something was getting closer to the surface. Old Mill Road had long since ceased to deserve its name. Cracked asphalt gave way to gravel, then to twin ruts through overgrown fields. Chloe's sedan wasn't built for this terrain, each bump and dip sending shudders through the frame. Beside her, Jack consulted a topographical map spread across his knees. "Should be about half a mile further," he said, tracing a finger along a faded line, then east into the woods. February's chill hung in the air, tree branches stark against a steel-gray sky. They'd left at first light, telling no one of their destination. Chloe had noticed a police cruiser parked across from her apartment building when she left, but it hadn't followed them. There, Jack pointed to a barely visible break in the tree line. That might be what's left of the access road. They parked where the ruts ended and continued on foot, equipment packed in their backpacks. Jack carried a high-definition recorder and electromagnetic field detector, borrowed from the radio station's ghost hunting segment producer. Chloe brought cameras, notebooks, and a small shovel. The access road was now little more than a game trail, winter bare branches clutching at their clothing as they pushed through. 20 minutes of hiking brought them to a clearing, an unnatural circle of relatively flat ground amid the rolling woodland. "This is it," Chloe said, her breath fogging in the cold air. The clearing was approximately 50 yards in diameter, overgrown but still discernible. At its center, partially covered by fallen leaves and forest debris, lay a large concrete slab. Metal posts, long since rusted, marked its perimeter. Jack activated the EMF detector, which immediately emitted a series of rapid beeps. "That's unusual. Strong electromagnetic field." Chloe approached the concrete slab cautiously. Years of exposure had cracked its surface, moss and lichen colonizing the fissures. At its center, a metal plate, roughly 3 feet square, bore faded warning signs. The yellow and black hazard stripes were still visible, though the text had largely weathered away. She could make out fragments: danger and authorized personnel only, and what might have been government property. "Look at this," she called to Jack, who was circling the perimeter with his instruments. She pointed to the concrete around the metal plate. See these cracks? They're not random. They form a pattern. The fractures radiated from the metal plate in a spiral pattern, like a galaxy viewed from above, too regular to be caused by simple weathering or frost heave. Jack joined her, the EMF detector still chirping frantically. "The field's strongest right here," he said, holding the device over the plate. "Something's generating electromagnetic energy beneath us." Chloe knelt to examine the fractures more closely. "These aren't just on the surface. They go deep." She pulled the small shovel from her backpack and carefully cleared debris from one of the larger cracks. It was at least 4 inches deep, possibly more. "Should you be doing that?" Jack asked, nervous. "I'm not going to break through to whatever's down there with a garden trowel," she replied, though she wasn't entirely convinced of that herself. She cleared more debris, revealing the extent of the fracturing. "It's like something's pushing up from below." Jack set up his recording equipment, placing sensitive microphones at various points around the slab. "If there's any sound coming from down there, this should pick it up." They worked methodically for the next hour, photographing, measuring, and documenting the site. Chloe found a rusted piece of metal equipment, half buried, at the clearing's edge, perhaps part of the original drilling apparatus. Jack discovered that the electromagnetic field fluctuated in a regular pattern, strengthening and weakening on a precise 4-minute cycle. "Look at this," Chloe called, examining an area where the concrete had crumbled away entirely. Beneath was not soil, as expected, but a layer of metal, a secondary containment system. They really wanted to keep something in or out. Jack's recorder suddenly emitted a harsh squeal of feedback. He rushed to adjust the settings, but the interference continued. "Something's interfering with the equipment." A low vibration began beneath their feet, subtle at first, then growing in intensity. The metal plate at the center of the slab began to hum. "We should go," Jack said, hastily packing up his gear. "Wait." Chloe placed her palm flat against the concrete. The vibration had a rhythm to it, familiar somehow. "It's the same pattern as the siren." The humming from the metal plate increased in volume. The EMF detector's beeping accelerated to a continuous tone. Among the trees surrounding the clearing, birds took flight in sudden synchronized panic. "Chloe, we need to leave. Now." Jack's voice cracked with urgency. She nodded, gathering her equipment. As they hurried back toward the trail, Chloe glanced back. For a moment, just the briefest instant, she thought she saw the metal plate shift slightly upward, as if something beneath was testing its strength. The vibration followed them all the way back to the car, diminishing with distance, but never quite disappearing. Neither spoke until they were back on paved road, the woods receding behind them. "It knows we were there," Jack finally said, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. It, whatever's down there, it responded to our presence." Chloe reviewed the photos on her camera's display screen. In several shots of the metal plate, there appeared to be a dark fluid seeping from beneath its edges, something she hadn't noticed while on site. "What do you think this is?" Jack glanced at the screen and quickly looked away, focusing on the road. "I don't know, but we're going to need more than just the two of us to figure this out." Back in Millridge, they stopped at Benson's diner to review their findings. The normally bustling lunch crowd was subdued, conversations hushed, movements lethargic. Even the clatter of dishes from the kitchen seemed muffled, as if the town were wrapped in cotton. "Everyone looks exhausted," Jack observed quietly. "They're not sleeping," Chloe replied. "Not properly, anyway." They spread their materials across the booth's table, photos, EMF readings, and Jack's audio recordings. When played back, the recordings revealed a low, rhythmic humming coming from beneath the concrete slab, almost like a heartbeat, but irregular. "We need to take this to Sheriff Donovan," Jack said. "Whatever this is, it's affecting the whole town." Chloe was less optimistic. "He already warned me off once." Because we have evidence. And because things are getting worse. As if to punctuate his statement, a crash sounded from the kitchen, followed by shouting. The cook, a mild-mannered man who'd worked at Benson's for decades, was screaming at a server, his face contorted in rage. The other patrons barely reacted, as if such outbursts had become commonplace. That evening, Chloe compiled their findings into a coherent presentation: photos, audio files, EMF readings, and historical documentation from Harold Wright's account and the original newspaper articles. She created backup copies on USB drives, keeping one and giving one to Jack, just in case, she said, not elaborating on what in case might entail. They agreed to meet at the sheriff's office the next morning. Chloe spent the night updating her wall, adding the new information and connections. The pattern was clearer now. Whatever had been buried beneath the concrete slab was becoming active again. The sirens were increasing in frequency. The town was changing, its people becoming more aggressive, more unstable, more. She was so absorbed in her work that she almost missed the subtle shift in the ambient noise of her apartment. The hum of the refrigerator, the tick of the wall clock, the distant sounds of traffic, all normal, familiar sounds. But underneath them now was something else, a barely perceptible vibration, a whisper of rhythm that matched the recording from the site. It was in town now, not just its influence, but its actual presence, seeping through the infrastructure, traveling through the ground beneath their feet. The seventh siren came at midnight, 7 minutes and 43 seconds, that felt like an eternity. Chloe stood at her window, watching the town. No one ran outside in confusion anymore. Instead, people emerged slowly from their homes, moving with eerie coordination, all facing north toward the woods, toward the source. When the siren ended, they remained outside for nearly 5 minutes before returning to their homes in the same synchronized manner. None spoke, none acknowledged each other. They moved like sleepwalkers, puppets on invisible strings. The next morning, Chloe drove to the sheriff's office with her evidence folder. Jack was waiting outside, looking haggard. "Did you hear it last night?" he asked. "Midnight exactly." She nodded. "Something's changed. It's not just affecting people when the siren sounds anymore. It's constant now." Sheriff Donovan kept them waiting for 30 minutes before his deputy ushered them into his office. The sheriff looked worse than either of them. His skin gray, eyes bloodshot, uniform rumpled. His office smelled faintly of whiskey. "Make it quick," he said, not offering them seats. Chloe laid out their evidence methodically. The historical documentation, the photos of the site, the EMF readings. Finally, she played the audio recording of the humming beneath the concrete. Donovan listened without comment, his expression unreadable. "You went to the site," he finally said, his voice flat. "People are suffering," Chloe replied. "Whatever's happening is getting worse. We need to evacuate the town, call in experts." "Experts?" Donovan laughed, a harsh sound without humor. "You think I haven't made calls? 3 weeks ago, I contacted the State Environmental Agency, then FEMA, then the FBI. Know what happened? Nothing. No one comes to Millridge anymore." A chill ran through Chloe. "What do you mean?" "Roads get rerouted. Paperwork gets lost. People forget they were supposed to come here." He leaned forward. "We're on our own, Miss Patterson. And you've just made things worse by disturbing the site." "You knew about it?" Jack asked. "All this time?" Donovan's gaze shifted to the window, where the water tower was visible in the distance. "My grandfather was sheriff when Meridian came to town. He was there when they sealed it up. Left records, a warning." His voice lowered. "Don't disturb what sleeps beneath. Don't listen to its call." "And you kept this secret while people suffered?" Chloe couldn't hide her anger. "I did what generations before me did. Contained it, protected the outside world. His eyes returned to them, now sharp with sudden clarity. But it's too late now. You woke it up. Really woke it up. As if on cue, the lights in the office flickered. Outside, car alarms began to wail. Go home, Donovan said, gathering their evidence and dropping it into his desk drawer. Lock your doors. Cover your ears tonight. As they left the station, Chloe noticed black SUVs parked across the street, government vehicles with tinted windows. Men in dark suits watched them from the sidewalk. They've been here all along, she whispered to Jack. Monitoring, not helping. That night, Chloe triangulated the Siren's location, using simple geometry and 3 recording devices placed around town. The result confirmed what she already suspected. The sound originated from the concrete slab in the woods. She called Jack with her findings, but his phone went straight to voicemail, unease prickling at the back of her neck. She drove to his apartment. His car was in the lot, but he didn't answer his door. Through the window, she could see his laptop open on the coffee table, surrounded by papers, but no sign of Jack. As she returned to her car, a black SUV pulled up beside her, the window lowered, revealing a man in a dark suit and tie. Miss Patterson, he said, his voice neutral, we need you to stop your investigation, for your own safety. She stood her ground. Who are you? Where's Jack? Mr. Rivera is being looked after. This situation is now under federal jurisdiction. What agency? She demanded. The window raised without answer, and the SUV pulled away. That night, the siren came again. This time Chloe was prepared with better recording equipment. As the wailing filled the air, she watched from her window as her neighbors emerged once more. But this time something was different. They began walking, all of them in unison toward the north edge of town, toward the woods, toward the source. The 8th siren came at sunset, breaking the established pattern of nighttime occurrences. Chloe was in her car, driving back from a fruitless attempt to find Jack at his workplace, when the wail began. Cars around her slowed and stopped, as drivers sat motionless behind their wheels, faces slack and eyes unfocused. This time, the siren lasted 8 minutes and 12 seconds. The extra 29 seconds felt significant, a declaration, a warning. As the sound faded, Chloe watched in horror as 3 people stepped out of their vehicles and calmly walked to the edge of Willowbrook Bridge. Before anyone could react, they climbed over the railing and dropped into the icy waters below. Others made no move to help. They simply returned to their cars and drove on, as if nothing had happened. Only Chloe rushed to the bridge, screaming for help, calling 911 on her phone. By the time emergency services arrived, it was too late for 2 of them. The third, a teenage boy, was pulled from the water but remained catatonic, his eyes fixed on some invisible point in the distance, lips moving in silent communion with something only he could hear. At the hospital, chaos reigned. The emergency room was filled with patients experiencing similar symptoms, hallucinations, psychosis, self-harm. Dr. Vivian Westbrook moved from bed to bed, her face a mask of professional composure, belied by the terror in her eyes. Chloe, she said, recognizing the librarian amidst the confusion. What's happening to our town? Something beneath us, Chloe replied, her voice low. Something that's been buried for a long time. Dr. Westbrook pulled her into an empty examination room. I've seen patients drawing the same image over and over. She showed Chloe a collection of papers, drawings made by different people of all ages. Each depicted the same spiral pattern descending into a central point, and they're all talking about what's underneath, what's calling to them. Have you reported this to anyone? County Health Department, CDC, State Psychiatric Association. The doctor's composure cracked slightly. No response. It's like we've been quarantined without being told. Chloe thought of the black SUVs, the men in suits, not quarantined, contained. As darkness fell, Chloe drove north, toward the woods. The roads were eerily empty, the few people visible standing motionless on sidewalks or in yards, faces turned skyward. At the edge of town, she parked and continued on foot, following the path she and Jack had taken days before. The forest was different at night. Shadows moved between trees, in ways that defied the gentle wind. No animals called or scurried in the underbrush. The woods were as silent as a tomb, save for the crunch of dead leaves beneath her boots and her own ragged breathing. The clearing, when she reached it, was transformed. The concrete slab at its center had split open like an eggshell, revealing a dark shaft that plunged into the earth. The metal plate lay twisted and bent several yards away, as if thrown by some immense force from below. Chloe approached cautiously, the beam of her flashlight seeming to be swallowed by the unnatural darkness of the shaft. The EMF detector she'd borrowed from Jack's apartment went wild, its display maxing out beyond its measurement capabilities. The air around the opening felt wrong, heavier, somehow charged with potential. She knelt at the edge, shining her light downward. The beam illuminated rough-hewn walls descending at a steep angle, metal rungs embedded in one side forming a ladder into the darkness. The original mining shaft, she realized, now uncovered after decades. From deep below came a sound, not the siren, but something organic, a rhythmic pulsing, like a massive heart beating in the Earth's core. Something else too, voices, human voices, calling from below. One of them sounded like Jack. Chloe backed away from the edge, her instinct for self-preservation warring with her need to find her friend. As she retreated, her flashlight caught movement at the forest's edge. Men in hazmat suits were emerging from the trees, their faceplates reflecting her light. She ran, crashing through underbrush, branches clawing at her face and clothes. Behind her, voices called out, clinical, professional voices ordering her to stop, to surrender, to come quietly. She made it back to her car and sped toward town, taking back roads to avoid potential roadblocks. Her apartment wasn't safe. They'd know to look for her there. Instead, she drove to the library, using her keys to enter through the staff door. In the reference section, surrounded by the comforting presence of books, she tried to make sense of what she'd seen. The shaft was open. Whatever had been sealed below was now free to emerge, and the government, or some shadowy agency within it, knew and was responding. But not to save the town, to contain the situation, to ensure that whatever happened in Millridge stayed in Millridge. Her phone buzzed with an emergency alert, mandatory evacuation order for Millridge Township. Chemical spill reported at Northern Industrial Site. Proceed to evacuation centers immediately. A lie, but a useful one. At least people would leave. Except when she looked out the library windows at Main Street, she saw no evacuation in progress. Instead, people were walking north, in the same eerie unison she'd witnessed after the last siren. All ages, all walks of life, moving like sleepwalkers toward the woods, toward the open shaft. Police cruisers and emergency vehicles formed a perimeter around the town center, but they weren't directing traffic or assisting with evacuation. They were creating a containment zone. Officers standing with weapons drawn, preventing anyone from leaving in any direction except north. As Chloe watched in horror, Sheriff Donovan emerged from the station across the street. His movements were jerky, uncoordinated, as if he were fighting against his own body. He managed to draw his service weapon, place it against his temple, and pull the trigger before his deputies could reach him. No one reacted to the sound of the gunshot. The procession continued uninterrupted, faces blank, eyes fixed on some invisible point in the distance. Chloe's phone buzzed again, an incoming call from an unknown number. She answered cautiously. "Miss Patterson." A man's voice, clinical and detached. "This is Agent Richardson. We know where you are. Stay put. We're coming to extract you." "What's happening?" she demanded. "What's making people walk north?" A pause. "Something we've been monitoring since 1957. Containment has been breached." The evacuation notice was our standard cover, but it's clear the psychic influence has progressed beyond our ability to manage conventional crowd control. Psychic influence? The entity below Millridge has been dormant for decades. Recent seismic activity in the region may have disturbed it. The Siren was our first indication of renewed activity, the psychic emanation that the human brain interprets as sound. "You knew all along," Chloe said, anger rising. "You let people suffer." "We maintained the containment protocol established in the 1950s, successfully, I might add, until recent interference. Your friend Mr. Rivera is currently assisting our researchers with understanding the nature of the communication." "Is he all right?" Another pause. "He's alive. Stay where you are. We'll be there in approximately 12 minutes. Chloe ended the call, her mind racing. Through the window, she could still see the procession moving north. Regular people, her neighbors, colleagues, acquaintances, now puppets for whatever lay beneath the town. And the government's plan seemed to be to let it happen, while they established a perimeter and extracted those few, like her, who remained somewhat immune to the influence. She couldn't leave Jack, couldn't abandon the town to whatever fate awaited them at the shaft. Decision made, she slipped out the library's back exit and made her way through alleyways and backyards, avoiding the main streets where the procession continued. At the northern edge of town, she found her path blocked by military vehicles and personnel establishing barricades. As she watched from the shadow of an abandoned gas station, she saw hazmat-suited figures emerging from the woods, half-carrying, half-dragging civilians who appeared injured or unconscious. They were loaded into unmarked vans with clinical efficiency. One of the hazmat figures removed his helmet, revealing a middle-aged man with a stern face. He consulted a tablet, then spoke to others who had gathered around him. Shaft penetration complete. Entity partially surfaced. Psychic containment failing. His voice carried in the quiet night. "Prepare for scorched earth protocol if the situation deteriorates further." Chloe didn't need military training to understand what that meant. If they couldn't control whatever was emerging, they'd destroy the entire area and everyone in it. A vibration began beneath her feet, subtle at first, then growing in intensity. The ground itself seemed to pulse with the same rhythm she'd heard in the shaft. Around her, streetlights flickered and died. Car alarms blared and then fell silent. The 9th siren began. But this time, it was different. No longer mechanical. The sound had an organic quality, a wailing that modulated and shifted in ways that bypassed the ears and resonated directly in the brain. It didn't stop after the usual duration, but continued, evolving into something almost melodic in its alien complexity. The military personnel at the barricade suddenly stood at attention, then began walking north, in the same trance-like state as the townspeople. The hazmat-suited researchers dropped their equipment and followed, leaving their patients unattended. The psychic influence had overcome even those who came prepared to fight it. In the distance, toward the woods, a glow appeared, not the warm light of fire or the harsh glare of floodlights, but something pulsating with colors that had no place in the natural spectrum. The ground shook more violently, and a sound like the earth itself groaning rose from below. Something was emerging, something ancient and vast and utterly alien to human comprehension. And Millridge was its welcoming committee. The siren's call had transformed. What began as a mechanical wailing now pulsed with organic complexity, a symphony of alien frequencies that bypassed the ears entirely, resonating directly in the mind. Chloe felt it pressing against her consciousness, probing for entry, seeking the vulnerable spaces between thoughts. She resisted, though she couldn't say how. Perhaps her obsession with understanding the phenomenon had somehow inoculated her against its full effect. Or perhaps it simply hadn't chosen her yet. From her position at the abandoned gas station, she watched as military discipline collapsed. Soldiers dropped weapons and walked north, joining the procession of townspeople. Their movements were synchronized now. Left foot, right foot, arms swinging in perfect unison, a human machine with thousands of components, all controlled by a single will. Chloe used the opportunity to slip past the barricade. The road leading to the woods was packed with people moving at the same measured pace. She kept to the shadows, paralleling their route while maintaining distance. The strange glow ahead grew brighter, pulsating with colors that seemed to exist at the edge of human perception, simultaneously vivid and impossible to focus on directly. The ground beneath her feet vibrated in a pattern that matched the siren's new rhythm. Trees swayed not with wind, but with the same pulsation, as if reality itself was being reshaped by whatever lay ahead. At the forest's edge, she hesitated. The procession continued into the trees, following a path that had not existed days before, a wide swath where vegetation had withered and died, creating a boulevard of decay leading to the clearing. Steeling herself, Chloe entered the dead zone. The sensation was immediate and overwhelming, like walking through an electromagnetic field that tingled across her skin and raised the hair on her arms. The air tasted metallic, carrying an ozone scent that burned her nostrils. As she approached the clearing, the true scope of what was happening became apparent. The concrete slab was gone completely, the shaft now a gaping wound in the earth 30 feet across. The ground around it had bulged upward, creating a ring of displaced soil and rock that resembled the rim of a massive impact crater. From within the shaft emanated that impossible light, colors shifting and bleeding into one another, defying categorization. Shadows moved within the illumination, suggesting immense shapes in constant, fluid motion. And rising from the opening, emerging inch by inexorable inch, was something that Chloe's mind refused to properly process. It had a physical form, certainly. It occupied space, displaced air, reflected light, but the form made no sense to human perception. Parts of it seemed to fold through dimensions that shouldn't exist, angles connecting in ways that violated Euclidean geometry, appendages that might have been tentacles or might have been wings, or might have been neither extended outward, their surfaces rippling with patterns that hurt the eyes. The townspeople had arranged themselves in concentric circles around the opening, standing motionless now, faces upturned to witness the emergence. In the innermost circle, Chloe spotted Jack. His expression, unlike the blank stares of others, was one of rapture. Tears streamed down his face, and his lips moved in what appeared to be prayer or supplication. The military and hazmat teams formed their own circle, separate from the townspeople. They had removed their protective gear and stood with arms outstretched, as if in welcome. The entity continued to rise from the shaft. Its bulk defied comprehension, vast beyond reckoning yet somehow contained within the clearing. It expanded upward and outward simultaneously, growing not by consuming space, but by creating it, reality stretching to accommodate its impossible geometry. As more of it emerged, the siren sound changed again, now emanating directly from the entity itself. No longer electronic or even organic, but something else entirely. The voice of something that had existed before humanity had learned to speak, before mammals had drawn breath, perhaps before the earth itself had cooled from stardust. It was communicating, not just broadcasting influence, but actually speaking to its assembled audience. And they were responding. The people in the innermost circle, Jack among them, began to change. The transformation was subtle at first, a shimmering quality to their skin, a fluidity to their movements, then more pronounced, limbs elongating, faces shifting, bodies becoming malleable as clay in unseen hands. They were being remade, reshaped to serve some purpose that human minds could not grasp. Chloe watched in horror as Jack's form blurred and reconstructed itself, His features remained recognizable, but something fundamental had changed, as if the boundaries between him and the entity, between him and reality itself, had become permeable. He turned, somehow sensing her presence, despite the distance and darkness. His eyes, no longer entirely human, found hers. His voice, when it came, seemed to bypass her ears, just as the siren had bypassed normal hearing. "Chloe, you came. It wants to show us. It wants us to understand." The voice was Jack's, but layered beneath it was something else. A chorus of voices, ancient and patient and utterly alien. "It's been waiting so long. Trapped, forgotten, but not dead. Never dead. Only dreaming beneath the world of men." She took an involuntary step backward. "Jack, what's happening to you?" "Evolution. Transcendence. We're becoming something more, something better. It chose us, Chloe. Chose this place, this moment. It's controlling you," she said. Though she knew it was more complex than that, this wasn't simple mind control. It was a fundamental rewriting of what Jack was. "No, it's freeing us from the limitations of human perception, from the prison of three-dimensional existence. You can join us. It wants you especially, the one who sought to understand." The entity pulsed with new colors as more of its bulk emerged from the shaft. The transformed people in the inner circle began to move in coordination with its rhythms, their bodies flowing like liquid, reshaping themselves further with each motion. The next circle of townspeople stepped forward, entering the zone of transformation. Their bodies shimmered and began to change, as the entity's influence remade them. Soon it would be the military personnel's turn. Then the researchers, each circle moving inward, being absorbed, being transformed. "It's beautiful, isn't it?" Jack's voice, that was not a voice, continued. "The beginning of something new, the old world ending, a better one being born." Beyond the clearing, beyond the forest, Chloe could see military vehicles arriving, larger ones, carrying what looked like missile launchers. The scorched earth protocol that she'd overheard was being implemented. They would destroy everything rather than let the entity escape. But it was already too late. The soldiers manning those weapons were already walking toward the clearing, drawn by the same call that had claimed their comrades. The entity was now mostly emerged, its bulk towering above the trees. Parts of it seemed to exist in multiple locations simultaneously, or perhaps it was simply too difficult for human perception to track its true form. It pulsed with energy, with light, with sound, all synchronized in patterns that rewrote the rules of reality around it. "Come, Chloe. It's waiting for you. It knows you, knows your curiosity, your need to understand." Jack extended a hand that was no longer entirely a hand, fingers too long, joints too fluid, skin rippling with the same patterns that covered the entity. "Don't be afraid. Death is a human concept. What awaits is transformation." Chloe found herself taking a step forward, then another, not controlled, not exactly, but drawn by a curiosity that transcended fear. What was this being? What could it show her? What lay beyond the limitations of human existence? The ground shook violently, nearly knocking her off her feet. In the distance, beyond the forest, emergency sirens began to wail, conventional ones, human ones. Evacuation orders blared from loudspeakers. The military's response to their loss of containment was escalating. They would sacrifice the town, the surrounding area, perhaps much more to stop this. The entity pulsed again, and something like laughter rippled through the air, not cruel, but ancient and knowing and utterly inhuman. It had existed for eons. It had waited patiently beneath the earth. Human weapons were inconsequential to something that had witnessed the birth and death of species, of continents, perhaps of worlds. It continued to rise, its bulk now extending beyond the clearing, beyond the forest, into the night sky above. As it ascended, the transformed people followed, first floating, then soaring upward, their bodies now as untethered from physical laws as the entity itself. Jack rose with them, his form shifting further, becoming something that only vaguely recalled humanity. Last chance, Chloe, come with us, or stay and witness the birth of a new age. From its periphery, she stood transfixed, part of her yearning to go, to transcend, to understand. But something held her back, some core of humanity that refused to surrender what she was, even for the promise of becoming something more. "I can't," she whispered. "I'm sorry." Sadness emanated from what had been Jack. "Then remember us. Tell our story. If anyone remains to hear it." The entity rose fully into the night sky, trailing its transformed servants behind it, like a comet's tail of former humanity. The light it emitted grew brighter, shifting through spectrums visible and invisible, illuminating the landscape for miles around. Military vehicles opened fire, missiles streaking upward, exploding against the entity's impossible bulk without effect. It moved toward the larger cities beyond the valley, its passage marked by distortions in the air, in light, in reality itself. The ground continued to shake, buildings in the distance collapsing. The shaft that had contained the entity for so long began to close, soil and rock flowing like liquid to seal the wound in the earth. And Chloe remained, watching as something beyond human comprehension departed with those who had welcomed it, leaving behind a world forever changed by its brief emergence. 6 months after what official reports called the Millridge incident, Chloe sat in a coffee shop in Portland, 300 miles and a lifetime away from her former home. Rain streaked the windows, blurring the pedestrians hurrying past on the sidewalk outside, normal people living normal lives, untouched by the truth she carried. Her laptop displayed a news article with the headline, "Millridge Cleanup Continues Following Chemical Disaster." The accompanying photo showed workers in hazmat suits, examining damaged buildings, the area surrounded by temporary fencing bearing government warnings. The official story had solidified quickly. A previously undiscovered chemical weapons storage facility from the Cold War had ruptured, releasing hallucinogens and toxins that caused mass psychosis and environmental damage. The town and surrounding area had been permanently evacuated, declared uninhabitable for at least 50 years. Convenient narratives for convenient minds. She closed the browser and opened a file labeled Evidence. Inside were the fragments she'd managed to salvage, photos, recordings. Most of her original documentation had been in her apartment, now part of a quarantine zone she'd never be allowed to re-enter. Jack's equipment and backups had disappeared along with him. What remained was incomplete, circumstantial, enough to fuel conspiracy theories, but not enough to threaten the official account. Her phone vibrated with an incoming text, a number she didn't recognize, with a message containing only a string of digits, 37.4291 degrees N, 122.1661 degrees W. Coordinates: somewhere in California. It was the third such message she'd received in the past month, each containing different coordinates. The first had led her to a small town in Nevada, where residents reported hearing a strange mechanical wailing at night. The second pointed to a rural community in Idaho, where local wildlife had begun disappearing at an alarming rate. She plugged the new coordinates into a mapping application. They indicated a location near Stanford University. She quickly searched local news for the area and found it immediately. Stanford researchers puzzled by unexplained acoustic phenomenon. According to the article, a sound similar to an emergency siren, but with unusual harmonic properties, had been recorded 3 times in the past month. Duration 7 minutes and 43 seconds. It was spreading. The entity that had emerged from beneath Millridge hadn't been alone. It had siblings, counterparts, aspects of itself, Chloe lacked the vocabulary to properly conceptualize what she'd witnessed, but she understood enough to know that what happened in Millridge was only the beginning. She tried to warn people. In the chaotic days following the emergence, she'd escaped the military cordon and made her way to neighboring counties, to state officials, to news outlets. Each time, her story was met with the same response: initial interest, followed by sudden disbelief, followed by the appearance of men in dark suits who escorted her from the premises. After the third such occurrence, she realized the pattern. They were tracking her, using her to identify people who might believe her story, then discrediting or silencing them. She became more careful after that, using burner phones, cash only, staying in motels that didn't ask for ID. The evidence she'd managed to save was uploaded to dozens of secure servers, file-sharing sites, and encrypted drives. Deadman switches would release it all publicly if she failed to check in every 72 hours. Not that it would matter much. The internet was already full of conspiracy theories about Millridge, easily dismissed as the ramblings of disturbed minds. The truth was too vast, too terrible for most to accept. Easier to believe in chemical leaks and mass hallucinations than to face the reality that something ancient and incomprehensible had awakened beneath their feet, something that could reshape human bodies and minds like clay, something that had siblings scattered across the country, perhaps the world, all stirring toward wakefulness. Her coffee had gone cold. Outside, the rain intensified, drumming against the windows in a rhythm that sometimes, in her darkest moments, reminded her of the entity's pulse. A man sat down across from her without invitation, middle-aged, unremarkable in appearance, wearing a raincoat still beaded with moisture. "Miss Patterson," he said quietly, "you're not as difficult to find as you think." Her muscles tensed, ready to flee, but his next words stopped her. "I know what you saw in Millridge. I believe you." She studied his face, looking for signs of deception. "Who are you?" "Someone who's been tracking similar phenomena for longer than you've been alive." He placed a business card on the table. It bore only a name, Daniel Murray, and a phone number. "There are others like you, survivors, witnesses, people who've glimpsed what lies beneath the veneer of ordinary reality." "Government?" she asked, not touching the card. He smiled thinly. "Let's just say we operate in the spaces between official agencies, sometimes with a reluctant cooperation, sometimes without their knowledge. What do you want from me?" "Your expertise, your experience." She frowned. "Immunity. The entity changed everyone in Millridge. Everyone except you. That makes you valuable, and possibly crucial to what's coming." The coordinates she'd been receiving flashed in her mind. "It's happening elsewhere." He nodded. "Stanford is just the most recent. We've identified 14 sites across North America where similar phenomena are occurring. Early stages, but accelerating. The same pattern? 7 minutes and 43 seconds. Always. The exact resonant frequency needed to weaken the barriers between their reality and ours." She finally picked up his card, turning it over in her fingers. "Barriers, you said. Plural. So there are more of these things." "We believe so, yes." The Millridge entity was just one of many. They communicate across vast distances, across dimensional barriers. The sirens you heard were a form of trans-dimensional signaling, a way for them to coordinate their emergence. "Why now? Why after all this time?" Murray's expression darkened. "That's the question, isn't it? Something changed, something disturbed them, after decades of dormancy." He leaned forward. "We need to understand what that was, to have any hope of stopping what's coming next." "And what is coming next?" "A great awakening. A transformation of our world to suit their needs." His voice lowered. "What happened in Millridge was just a test, a proof of concept. They're learning how to reshape human consciousness, human bodies, preparing us. For what? Harvesting, we think, or terraforming. The concepts don't translate well to human understanding. Chloe thought of Jack, his body transforming, ascending with the entity into the night sky, not dead, but changed into something beyond human comprehension. "I have conditions," she said finally. "I want access to all your research, all your data, and I want to know what happened to the people who were taken, especially Jack Rivera." Murray nodded. "We've been tracking the transformed, monitoring their activities from a distance. They're constructing something in the upper atmosphere, beyond conventional detection methods. They're still alive? In a manner of speaking, they've been repurposed." His clinical tone couldn't fully mask the horror beneath the words. "We can discuss details at a secure location. My car is outside." As they left the coffee shop, Chloe noticed a young woman at a corner table, headphones on, apparently absorbed in her laptop. Nothing unusual, except for the spiral pattern she was drawing repeatedly on her notepad, identical to the one Dr. Westbrook had shown her months ago. The infection was spreading, not just at the identified sites, but everywhere. Subtle influences traveling through digital networks, through water systems, through the very air itself, preparing humanity for what was to come. In the car, Murray handed her a tablet. "These are the other survivors we've identified. People who, for reasons we don't yet understand, seem resistant to the psychic influence." She scrolled through the list of names and locations. A professor in Massachusetts, a truck driver in Texas, a high school student in Oregon. Ordinary people united only by their immunity to an extraordinary threat. "How do we stop it?" she asked. Murray's hands tightened on the steering wheel. "We're not sure we can, but we have to try." As they drove through the rain-slicked streets, Chloe's phone vibrated with another text. "New coordinates, 40.7128 degrees N, 74.0060 degrees W, New York City." "It's accelerating," she said, showing Murray the message. "They're targeting major population centers now." He nodded grimly. "We've been tracking unusual seismic activity beneath Manhattan for the past week. Subtle vibrations that don't match any natural pattern, like something moving underground or waking up." "Precisely." Rain drummed on the roof of the car, its rhythm occasionally shifting into patterns that seemed almost deliberate, almost meaningful. Chloe found herself counting the intervals between heavier drops, wondering if they too might add up to 7 minutes and 43 seconds. "The people of Millridge," she said after a long silence. "The ones who were transformed. You said they're building something in the upper atmosphere?" Murray turned onto a highway heading east. "A structure of some kind. Our satellite imagery shows distortions, areas where light bends in ways it shouldn't, where radiation signatures shift and fluctuate." "A doorway," Chloe whispered, remembering Jack's words. "The beginning of something new. The old world ending, a better one being born." "That's our working theory, yes. A gateway to allow more of these entities access to our reality." She stared out at the rain-blurred landscape, thinking of all the ordinary people going about their lives, unaware of what stirred beneath them, unaware of the transformation that awaited. "Why me?" she finally asked. "Why am I immune? Why were any of us spared?" Murray shook his head. "We have theories. Brain chemistry, genetic factors, psychological profiles. Nothing conclusive yet, but understanding your immunity might be our only hope of developing some kind of defense." The highway stretched before them, leading toward an uncertain future. In the distance, lightning flickered in patterns too regular to be natural. The storm was speaking in a language older than humanity, older than the earth itself, and beneath cities and towns across the country, ancient things were answering. The sirens would continue to spread, one community at a time. 7 minutes and 43 seconds of alien harmony, preparing human minds for the change to come. Most would welcome it in the end, would walk willingly toward transformation, just as the people of Millridge had done. But some, like Chloe, would resist, would remember what it meant to be human in a world becoming increasingly less so, would fight to preserve not just lives, but humanity itself. The true horror of Millridge wasn't just the entity from below, it was the knowledge that humans had discovered it decades ago and chosen secrecy over safety. They had gambled with lives to study something they couldn't comprehend, and now that knowledge was buried along with the truth. But Chloe carried that truth now, and as long as she did, there remained a spark of hope that humanity might yet survive the Great Awakening that had begun in a small town, with a siren that wailed for exactly 7 minutes and 43 seconds.